Hi everyone. Something a little different this time. I'm joined by Ryan Lucht, who I got to know in his role at EPO, which is an experimentation platform software for all kinds of product and conversion rate type experimentation. He can no doubt clarify the exact details of that, which was recently acquired by Datadog, which is an organization that does a lot of experimentation, but is also focused on the product analytics, product monitoring and alerting, and those kinds of features as well. And I'm excited to have a conversation with Ryan, particularly around feeling like the area of experimentation that Ryan works in is just that bit further along the maturity curve than SEO testing. SEO testing is newer than UX, product, conversion rate testing. And so what I'm hoping we're all going to learn together today is what things are still challenging at the next stage of the maturity curve. What can we anticipate maybe solving? Where do the products go? Where do the capabilities go? And yeah, generally, I think there's just a lot to learn from folks who are a little further along on that journey. So Ryan, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to range across a wide range of subjects today, but I thought I'd start in that kind of maturity area. So you have written before I've read articles on the EPO blog, for example, about ways to sell your organization on having an experimentation mindset or getting into testing. But I'm particularly interested to hear your thoughts and ideas around that education and culture change that companies go through when they start to first think about testing, take it more seriously, and then embed it strategically.
Yeah. I think the thing that was maybe most interesting for me to learn as I kind of went along in my experimentation career and met more people was that it's almost never an easy journey. I think, when I look at the organizations who are running the most experiments in the world, your Netflixes and Microsofts and Googles of the world, who talk about the tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of experiments that they run every year, I kind of just assumed maybe those organizations got it from the get-go. They had technical founders and CEOs who were kind of nerds, and maybe they just always understood that this was a valuable thing, and that's almost never the case. It's almost
Really?
always this very hard-fought, long-won battle to bring experimentation as a way of thinking and as a way of making decisions into an organization. It almost always starts with a beachhead team somewhere, right? Like that one leader, one team who sees the value of experimentation and is determined to go prove it out. And over time, winning some allies, making some believers, finding folks inside the organization who have ideas and things they want to try, and giving them that capacity to try their ideas and kind of winning them over to the team that way. And then having success that they can point to and say, like, hey, as a result of our ability to run experiments, look at all the cool stuff we've been able to do. And eventually other teams get brought along, or it becomes a mandate.
Yeah. And that stage is really interesting to me as well. What does that tipping point look like in your experience from nice to have, maybe in some beachhead teams, to must have?
Yeah. I guess there's a couple different ways it can look. It could literally become, in the case of Microsoft, right? Like the team that really proved out experimentation at Microsoft first was Bing. The head of Bing was Satya Nadella. Satya became the CEO of Microsoft,
Famous
and
guy.
that's when experimentation became, a top-down mandate for the entire Microsoft organization. So it could be as dramatic as that. It could be that there are some teams, especially like in large product organizations, like some product teams are just demonstrably crushing it. They're having great success with their goals, and they become models that leadership tries to get the rest of the product teams to emulate. Or it could look like, some very tough-minded leaders in the middle of the org chart who are determined on experimentation. I think about one a lot who kind of built the culture at their company by almost being passive aggressive in Slack threads. Every time PMs would announce a new feature had been launched, he would start a thread and be like, hey, this looks awesome. Where are the experiment results that show us that this is a good thing we should be doing? And just kind of over time, the PMs did get it in their heads that, we got to run experiments to make sure that the things that we think are good ideas are actually moving the needle, aren't somehow harming us, etc.
Or possibly to get that one guy out of our Slack threads. But it's interesting talking about the performance side. So obviously you can have that great example where a product team's crushing it. Yep. And either other teams look to emulate that, or they get encouraged to emulate that because leadership sees the success and wants to replicate it. There's something interesting, I think, on the other side of that spectrum as well, something that we occasionally see more as a fear, I think, than a reality. But one of the dangers when you start measuring things in this way is you're going to discover that some of your ideas aren't as good as you thought. As you thought they were. I mean, inevitably, you're going to discover that some of your ideas are not as good as you thought they were. What have you seen happen when an organization comes under, or a team comes under pressure because their win rates aren't as high, or too many of their ideas are seeming to not play out when they're exposed to that kind of white heat of test results?
Yeah, I mean, even before you get to that point, experimentation is a lot like OKRs or any method of management by objective instead of just management by activity, in that it very quickly brings to light if you have the right measurement strategy or not. So like a classic example, just trying to get engineers to use feature flags to safely deploy code instead of just shipping things to production. In a lot of maybe less mature or older school engineering organizations, engineers are measured on how many lines of code that they ship to the product or to the code base. If those engineers were to start using feature flags and experiments, they're going to very quickly find out they shouldn't be shipping a pretty significant proportion of the code they were shipping before. So they are just like immediately disincentivized to ever care about running experiments or using feature flags. This will similarly show up with product teams too, right? If there are not the right business metrics, user customer metrics defined to act as a North Star, then you fall back to things like win rate. And the thing about win rate is it's never going to be very high. I don't think this is just a virtue of product experimentation. I think this is true of many fields where innovation is, or knowledge is, the name of the game, right? Drug research, public policy, new products being introduced to market, books being published. Most movies are, the old saying in Hollywood is that most movies lose money. It doesn't seem to be a failing of a product team. So win rate is a trap, because I'm not sure how high it can go, even if you could influence it. But B, if you're measuring on win rate, then you're sort of naturally asking people, don't try anything too bold or innovative. Please stick to safe ideas. And those safe ideas are going to keep you stuck doing what the competition is doing, most likely, right? You're going to stick to consensus ideas that won't help you break out. So when I hear that teams are being chastised for win rate, to me, that says that we don't have a better measurement strategy in place. We're still trying to manage by activity and not objective. So should this team be responsible for revenue? Should it be responsible for 7-day user retention? Should it be responsible for driving adoption of a feature or driving, clicks to the website, or who knows what the metrics should be? But we need to have like a real strategy in place for that.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, with all the kinds of drug research or finding those breakout winners, it would be kind of surprising if it was easy and if most of those experiments worked. And I think there's something
easy, we'd all be doing it.
Right, and also there'd be much less need for testing, frankly, because actually you would just ship everything, ship all the good ideas. But there's something interesting we've been casting around in running experimentation programs. Is you talked about kind of input and output metrics. I've felt like it's actually quite valuable to have some input metric objectives. Objectives is perhaps the wrong word. metrics, the measurement approaches, particularly around things like test cadence. And again, you can spot pitfalls all over the place, right? A big impactful test might be harder to build, so you might run fewer of them. But fundamentally, you want to keep that cadence high. You want to, we feel like you do want to keep an eye on successful results, but also the number of ones that come out statistically significant or past whatever statistical hurdle you're looking to use, not as the purpose, right? Not as the not as the objective, but as the management tool, I guess, to make sure that we're at least doing the input metrics that we bet, or that we've taken these. We've strategically said we think this is what's going to line up, and I guess even if you're looking at the business metrics that you're talking about, it's possible to underperform, right? You can have an OKR of revenue and not move the needle on revenue as much as you'd like.
Sure.
And what have you seen your kind of most successful customers do when they get stuck in that kind of rut where they've had a dry patch in getting the results that they want?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I'm a huge believer in velocity, especially as a management metric. I think sort of the delineation in my mind, right, is when you are a single team running experiments. If you're measured on velocity, then that could be easy to game, right? You could launch 100 inconsequential tests. Sure. And look, some of them might be impactful. I've seen tiny changes without explanation or seeming explanation have, big impact before. But when you have someone who's responsible for experimentation across a number of teams or across departments in a company and goals, then I think velocity is a great management metric, because it's a measure of how much capacity do we have to test the day-to-day decisions that we're making, right? And can we expand that capacity by enabling other teams in their use cases? So maybe today organizations are running a lot of product experiments or a lot of conversion rate experiments, but they haven't done any SEO testing. So there should be, whether this is a center of excellence, a platform team, a decentralized sort of council of experimentation folks, that team should be measured on velocity, and bringing SEO testing into that fold of capabilities would be a way to increase the velocity, the number of experiments run,
organization wide.
Yeah, absolutely.
It touches in something interesting, actually. I was going to come to this later, but it's a nice segue into the thing that has always been a bit puzzling to us. I mentioned that SEO testing is further down the maturity curve, relatively new. SEO has existed for a long time, but the concept of experimentation is much newer. And we've always been a little bit surprised at, never mind the take-up on the SEO side, at the integration into product. So I gave a talk many years ago, almost a decade ago at CXL, about what we were doing in SEO testing, and that was to a team of product and user and conversion rate testing folks. And I made what I thought was a perhaps dangerous claim, but I didn't get too much pushback on, which was, in my time as an SEO consultant, the decade before that, I'd had a lot of times where I'd made a recommendation to a client and had pushback saying, we're worried about the effect this is going to have on conversion rate or revenue, sign up, whatever it might be, kind of separately to the SEO. Obviously, you can debate the SEO recommendation, but I literally never picked up the phone from a client to say, our product team or our conversion rate team is wanting to make this change or is wanting to run this experiment, and they're worried that it might have an impact on organic search visibility. What do you think?
Sure.
And I'm fascinated if you have any insight into, if this feels like a blind spot to me, but we end up in the pure SEO world thinking a lot about conversion rate, right? Thinking about users, thinking about not just the search engine bots, but what happens when the actual user visits that page. It seems to me that too many product teams don't think enough about the way that, through a Google lens or a Bing lens, those changes are going to be viewed. Do you have any insights into that? Does that resonate with you at all?
Sure. I think it's probably a tooling shortcoming. And I'll tell you what I mean. Like, and maybe I'll even take a step back and talk exclusively about product and conversion rate experiments for a second, and then I'll bring it back to the SEO stuff. But when your tooling and data stack, let's be specific, is limited, it has very real downstream impact on how teams think about experimentation, especially less mature ones, because they really only think about what's available to them. And I'll give you an example. When I was consulting, one of the clients I worked with was a two-sided marketplace. They consigned and sold vintage designer clothing. And they had different product teams in the org. One was responsible for the buyer experience, like the folks who came on the site to shop and buy clothes. Another was responsible for finding folks interested in selling items from their closets and consigning those items with them. But they, were using a pretty standard at the time website A/B testing tool. This is a long time ago. And there wasn't really a central repository of all the business metrics that they cared about. And so each of these teams would go off and run their own A/B tests, but not care about the other's metrics. So the seller team introduced this pop-up across the site, sell your clothes with us, we'll give you an extra $100 or whatever it was. And they saw their, the number of sellers who were enrolling on the site skyrocketed. It was great. They rolled it out to the site. And it was really only when we were working with them to build a more mature testing program that we went back and retested that, but this time included all of those buyer metrics as guardrails on the experiment. As you might imagine, this added quite a bit of friction to the shopping process and probably wasn't good for the business as a whole.
As a net impact, yeah.
You could have the same, and I think, in fact, many teams do have the same issue with SEO metrics, right? Where if they're running website A/B tests, they're looking at the things that, their tools enable them to track, which is clicks on buttons and conversion rates. And maybe if we're lucky, we have some sort of API call that's like very closely tied to the actual revenue event. But I can tell you what those tools are not piping in, and that's, performance metrics, like maybe your core web vitals or first contentful paint. Like there's nothing, certainly no capability for metrics that live off of the website to get considered in those website A/B tests. So anything that's happening where we would have to like join data that we have on our search engine performance, that's just not a capacity that teams have today. So they just don't think about it. So one of the things that I'm interested, like with the acquisition of Eppo by Datadog, one of Datadog's products is a real user monitoring suite that measures things like core web vitals, site performance, errors, etc. So it'll be nice to have all of that automatically coupled into experiment results. But candidly, if you had asked me this question a year and a half, 2 years ago, I don't think that I was thinking of it so much either. Even though we know that website performance, for instance, has a very real causal link with revenue too, right? Microsoft and Amazon have run all these experiments where they slow down their websites, a little fraction of a second, and see these, for Amazon, I think it was a 2% drop in revenue, which, as you might imagine, is a
per every 100 milliseconds or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was wild. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think it's just been a limitation of what's available to the teams running those tests. I think if they were thoughtful about how to join that data together, it needs to be something that becomes automatic. It needs to be automatically there for every test, because if you have to think about that every time you go to do it, you're going to forget.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's something also interesting to me about optimizing for rates. You talk about conversion rates.
Sure.
And in our world, click-through rate is one of the metrics that comes up, as in percentage of people who see a search result listing and who click through to your website. And people forget their fractions. And that you can change the numerator or the denominator. And in the conversion rate world, the SEO game is often about changing the denominator, about saying, we're trying to get more folks on the website, and we're hoping that the conversion rate stays roughly static and maybe even slightly improves because the targeting, you're ranking for more relevant things and Google's sending better traffic,
maybe,
whatever it might be. Maybe. But, or at least if it's going to get worse, which it may do at volume, you get 10x the traffic, over time, that may convert less well in a ratio sense, but
still
you
be
might be
thrilled.
way ahead in an absolute sense. And that's always been fascinating to me in the conversion rate sense, that you're mainly optimizing the numerator, and there's a lot of assumptions that go into the static behavior of the denominator.
Yeah, and again, I think it's a relic of what was most available to teams when these A/B testing tools first appeared on the market 10, 20, in one or two cases, 25 years ago. Like those conversion rates were easy for those tools to build telemetry for and measure outside of any other analytics, metrics, business intelligence systems that a company had in place. And like, this was when I was consulting, the, bane of my existence was the amount of time that I wasted trying to chase down and or explain away at a certain point discrepancies between what website A/B testing tools were saying and what a business's other internal source of truth was saying, because you can't have two revenue numbers on the P&L. Right? Like, at some point, there is a definition.
Finance
of
has an
revenue.
opinion. Yeah.
Exactly. And let me tell you, they're not forming their opinion on what's in your testing tool. So either you need to take a different approach to experimentation, where all of your metrics are coming from that same source of truth, or you're always going to have those deltas and those discrepancies. And yeah, like you say, conversion rate is not a particularly great metric. It can kind of story tell about what we're doing to both the numerator and the denominator, but at the end of the day, like, I don't know anyone who would rather have lower revenue but a higher conversion rate.
And that's leaving aside all of the average order value, lifetime value, acquisition cost. Like, there's many other things in there, but it actually points to something else I was fascinated by. So one of the things that we see, which we sometimes beat ourselves up about and feel like is unique to SEO, but I have a suspicion may not be, is that question about the data being challenged. So you talked about, obviously you've got your data in your analytics platform or your CRM or your testing platform, and finance has their data. And as you say, in a battle, finance is the ultimate boss.
I would hope.
I mean, I don't know any organization where that's not true, but do you find we sometimes come across things like, for example, we'll have a winning test, and so there's two things I want to describe. One is sometimes we'll have a winning test, and folks still have a desperate desire to see the human scale version. So it's all very well that you're telling me that we're up 4% in organic traffic, but I want to see a ranking that's improved, or I want to see the anecdote to go with the data. Maybe that doesn't translate so well. I don't know. And then the other one is connecting our necessarily imperfect data to the finance data. And so, yeah, I'm interested if you have kind of interesting stories about either of those.
Yeah, I think I think one of the horrible cognitive biases that we're stuck with as humans is that we think we can eyeball much more minute things than we actually can. I think it's Johnny Longden from Spiro who has a LinkedIn post where he kind of just created a random graph of maybe like orders over time, and it's daily, and somewhere in the time series that he shows, he applied a 5% increase in the total number of orders, but it's distributed across all these day by day points. And let me tell you, you cannot eyeball where that 5% increase is, even though you would think,
to find that post. Yeah,
if it's real, surely I should be able to see it. I also think there's some misunderstanding, and this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's a point worth making. Like, I think there's some misunderstanding that folks have when they're newer to running tests about what our experiment results are actually telling us in terms of forecasting impact forward like that. Right, like, we run these experiments, we make some observations, and then we use statistics to make an inference about what the true effect is of our change. But when I look at a testing tool, I'm going to look at control variation. The variation had a 5% uplift or whatever it is. That uplift is not part of the inference. It is not the true effect. It's just what we observed over the course of the experiment. And even if it is a statistically significant result, or has a high probability to be best, whatever, school of statistics you want to subscribe to. That doesn't say anything about the reliability of our point estimate uplift that we observed over the course of the test. That's what the confidence interval or the credible interval is for. We need to, communicate some uncertainty about our results, because you could have a statistically significant 5% uplift with a confidence interval that ranges from a 4.5% lift to a 5.5% lift, and that tells us one thing. Or it could be statistically significant, but the confidence interval could be from 0.5% to 9.5% lift, and that's a very, very different story. Very different thing that we need to communicate when we're sharing those test results. So, we tend to just share point estimates, and I think it creates these expectations. Oh, that means I should be able to see this on a graph, or I should be able to see that one ranking go up, or, you said 5%. I'm not seeing 5% in the numbers. Where's the 5%? Right. And, there's a lot of reasons for that, and we can certainly go into them. But I think one of the, core things to learn right at the start is communicate sufficient uncertainty about what we're saying here. Otherwise, the catch-22 is it's impossible to have a perfect forecast. But at the same time, if someone raises questions and we don't answer those sufficiently, it could erode trust in experimentation overall. So we got to be ready to back things up.
Yeah, well, and it erodes trust in precisely the thing we're trying to do, which is apply a little bit more rigor, a little bit more statistics to this whole game. There's a whole interesting rabbit hole that maybe we'll try and avoid burrowing down around winner's curse and the kind of compounding multiple tests. Maybe we'll come back to that. But the point you make about credible intervals and communicating uncertainty is an interest. We actually had a very long internal discussion recently about the best ways of communicating the confidence in the credibility in the result, as in this is a winner, versus the likely range. And I'm choosing my words very carefully. There was a lot of discussion about the words likely, the words credible, all these kind of things. And I feel, and I think our consensus where we got to was that the broader credible interval, the kind of we're 95% sure, that something might lie in a given range, is useful for the declaring a winner, but that you probably often want a narrower interval for communicating likely impact and for summing those impacts across a program. And one of the things that we've been experimenting with is the idea of the likely interval. I don't know if we made up that language, but essentially more likely than not, the 51% band, not to declare a winner, right? So you apply your kind of statistical rigor to get, but better than a point interval is to say, it is more likely than not that this result lies in this range. And yeah, we're quite, this isn't in our product thinking yet. This is in our kind of R&D side of things. Sure. But we're just experimenting with what kind of ranges do you get when you sum these things? Do you continue to sum the broadest possible interval? Do you sum the midpoints? Do you sum the likely ranges? Yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts that you've?
Yeah,
have you had these debates as well?
Sure. I think it's a question that's best left to every. I mean, even within an organization, it could be a team by team decision, right? Like the thing that we're always choosing on a curve between an experimentation is precision and speed, essentially, right? Because if we wanted to, maybe speed is the wrong word in this case, resources more broadly. Because if we wanted to make those intervals narrower, we could by running the test for longer or including more subjects in the test, maybe more pages if it's an SEO
rerunning
test.
It or different kinds of experiments. Yep.
There's likely some ceiling on our ability to obtain precision, but if we wanted to expend more resources on a certain test, we could get to a narrower range. But it all kind of depends on, how precise do we need to be and how exact do we need to be, especially, how are these results being baked into forecasts or other kind of forward-looking thinking? Maybe in SEO, it's okay to have an interval that's going to not contain the actual uplift half of the time. I think in product experiments, folks would push back on that quite heavily, and maybe they'd say we want a 90% interval instead.
So remember, I'm talking here about trying to gain forecasts that don't balloon in, estimation. What would be the word for that? Error, I guess.
Sure.
And this comes to the aggregating question, actually, because I think probably what I'm leaning towards is experimenting with different kinds of things to correct for, say, the winner's curse. I mentioned earlier.
Sure.
If you could sum the midpoints, but apply a confidence interval to the sum rather than, or confidence interval is the wrong word, but error bounds estimate on the sum. But you probably want to dampen that first, right, to account for the winner's curse of what you're selecting.
Yeah. I mean, historically, there's been sort of the industry wisdom, let's call it, to apply a haircut to your results, right? Because we know that when we sum up experiments, they're going to be biased upwards. We're going to end up with a larger estimate than what we believe is true. In, the product world, there is a gold standard approach available, which is to run a global holdout to have some percentage.
Yeah, that's harder on the SEO side. Yeah,
it's hard on the product side too. Candidly, almost nobody does it because it's so hard to do.
But because it's theoretically there, it's kind of
it's theoretically there, but it's very, very hard to actually pull off in practice. One of the things that Amazon and Netflix and EPO kind of came to independently, and then we all compared notes at the MIT conference on digital experimentation, and we're all very happy to see what we're doing similar things. Was a way to use Bayesian hierarchical models to essentially come up with cumulative estimates of multiple experiments that account for the winner's curse. Amazon went and back tested their method and found that it came up with estimates that were very, very similar to their global holdouts that they actually ran. The math obviously gets beyond my pay grade pretty quickly, but my understanding is it's not computationally too crazy to do.
I think I read one of the papers about this, and you're right that the kind of theoretical statistics gets a bit gnarly, but the actual algorithm you have to run at the end of it is not too bad, right? Like
not crazy.
The programming is not too crazy,
right? And, it's not hundreds of lines of code necessarily.
No, and I think that there's I've seen some kind of Monte Carlo forecasting methodology that can you're not even trying to solve these equations, right? You can just model them, and I think we've been experimenting with some of that stuff, probably off the back of the exact conference that you're talking about.
To like just to put a bow on it for the purposes of this conversation, I think the takeaway is, these are challenges that the biggest experimentation companies in the world are still struggling with themselves. And companies where, in the case of Amazon, how many times has Jeff Bezos talked about the importance of experimentation in shareholder letters? It's pretty baked into their culture there. And yet coming up with accurate forecasts or, estimates of cumulative impact is still a challenge. Still something that, there's some degree of pushback on and teams need to work on. So for all the rest of us who are not at Amazon, the 99.9%, so to speak, I think we could take some solace in the fact that we are not just, off here on an iceberg, struggling to figure out something that everyone else seems to have figured out. This is, still kind of the leading edge in the space, so to speak.
Yeah, we can take those trickle-down algorithms that come from the folks who are able to run the global holdout or whatever else, whatever other approach. It strikes me that there's one more thing that we hear sometimes, which is I always find a little mystifying, and I'm curious if it comes up in your world as well. Again, if you're able to run a global holdout, it would somewhat take care of this. But is we run an annual testing program, we've seen however many winners, we've deployed however many winners, and the cumulative impact that you might come up with, whatever methodology, whether you're summing midpoints, whether you're doing winner's curse, Bayesian hierarchical stuff, whatever you're doing, doesn't match our year-over-year performance. And it's always a little bit kind of head smacking of like, well, yeah, like what do you think your competitors were doing while you were running all these experiments? But do you get that? Hey, we've been a customer for a year now. We've had some winners, but our conversion rate isn't up as much as we think it should be, or is even down because of which could be macro effects, could be competitors, could
exactly.
Be anything.
Yeah, I think.
But do you hear that?
I think luckily it's been rare that I've come across it.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, look,
maybe this is a maturity
curve
thing. Yeah,
it is a little bit. It I think that's fair to say. But to your point, a lot of it has to do with what are we not able to quantify and put error bars on, right? Mm-hmm. Like the ability to run experiments and quantify the impact of a decision we make is a luxury. There are all sorts of macro and external things that we can't quantify the impact on. And yet, I'm sure the same people asking these questions are more than happy to just kind of stick their finger in the air and say like, oh, yep, tariffs are, really having an impact on our business, or interest rates are really having an impact on our business. Even though they can't quantify that, they're more than happy to, draw that causal link in their mind. That's kind of the thing about business is that we are in competitive markets where not everything is in our control. Sometimes that warrants rerunning certain tests, right? Like maybe we think consumer sentiment has changed and we should go retest some of those incentives that worked really well for us last year. So, there's a value to this line of thinking that's worth going down. But yeah, I mean, at some point you're asking us to forecast the world, and well, if you can do that, I would like to meet you. And I imagine you are already, one of the 5 richest people in the world.
Yeah, precisely. Okay, cool. I think we've covered a whole range of really interesting tactical stuff there, and I've got a lot to think about of the areas where we're likely to continue facing some of these challenges as our side of things matures, and some areas where they're definitely solvable, which is interesting. You've written recently. I should plug your Substack, by the way. There's some really interesting writing that you've done in a personal capacity as well. And I was interested in you talked recently about the market size for testing tools. And this obviously triggered by the fact that there's been a range of different transactions taking place in the space, whether it's M&A, whether it's been private equity, whether it's been whatever. And you're obviously just living through the integration of Eppo into Datadog now. You mentioned the opportunity to tie into the RUM metrics that Datadog is providing, but in a bigger picture sense, it seems like this makes a ton of sense to you. You understand the strategic imperative of like Eppo getting closer to the Datadog stack. What's exciting? What's coming down the pipe that you think will really make that work strategically?
Yeah, I don't know how much I can say publicly, but I'll
not looking
reiterate,
for the secrets, but
I'll just reiterate. Yeah, what I said in that newsletter issue, which is, I think having flagging and experimentation deeply coupled with other sort of non-negotiable parts of a company's tech stack, whether that's, Datadog with observability, or it's, some other acquisition that happens for some other testing company in the future. I think it is a powerful way to get companies who aren't running experiments today running experiments. That's the main lid or ceiling that we have on the market size for testing tools today, is just that still the majority of companies in the world are not leveraging this super powerful tool that they could and should be leveraging, or, they're using it in very limited use cases. The more companies that we get running experiments, the more that market size is going to grow. And that's, true not just in an immediate sense, but also that's really how things have grown over the last 5 years, I think, is this dispersion of people from big tech companies to maybe early stage startups. So like a lot of our customers at Eppo were folks who went from being at Meta, from being at Twitter, from being at Amazon. They left to go join startups to be, the head of data for this early stage startup. And they said, hey,
where's all the
experimentation stuff? Yeah, that experimentation stuff we did was so powerful. Like, I need to replicate those capabilities here. And they kind of brought that culture of experimentation with them. That I think is one of the growth loops that's really powered the market over the last 5 years. So if we want that trend to continue and keep compounding, we just got to get more companies running experiments today.
Yeah, which is mind-blowing to think about from our perspective, where we're so much more in the foothills of like the number of companies that are actually really running SEO testing at scale, and thinking about you still describing that most of your prospective customers are still potentially not, even when we look at that crowded space of the number of brands doing variations on what you do.
I think collectively we're still sort of in that early adopter crossing the chasm moment, just barely, right? So for SEO testing, I could easily imagine you're still at the very
scrabbling for the beachhead,
visionary side of that curve. But I mean, that's exciting. I think especially with all of the uncertainty and change that AI kind of brings to the game, SEO and more broadly, I think the ability to run experiments and figure out what works on the fly, adapting to that change is going to be a pretty important capability.
Yeah, we feel like this is the moment we've been building for, because the more AI powered that process becomes, the more you're experimenting against a black box, the less it is rules based, the less it is checklist based, the less that
100%.
it is just kind of best practices. So all good. Let's bring it to a close. I'll just final shout out to your LinkedIn and your Substack, if we can put links to both. And I'm particularly interested, maybe look forward to the follow-up posts, because I know you've been looking at the quantified and experimentation side of health and fitness as well. And
always go nerd out.
Yeah, so there's some great posts to follow up on that as well. And we have interesting discussions about this internally our end, where it feels like folks fall into different camps. So obviously you've got some folks who have no interest in the data, but even among the data folks, there's some who are like striving for a target, some people who are much more about the process, and some who are looking for the quantification of, was that a win? What percentage difference has that made? So I'm looking forward to more of that overlap as well.
Right on. Well, thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you for taking time to talk today. As I say, we'll put links to all the resources we've mentioned. We should try and dig out that one you mentioned of the see if people can spot the 5% uplift in the data, because
I'll see if I can dig that up.
I think folks will definitely be interested in that. But anyway, take care.
Right on.